The relationship between surgeons and anesthesiologists can be a complicated one. It sometimes feels like we can't live with each other, we can't live without each other. It's at the end of the day, however, a partnership, and I think there are certain principles on which this relationship is founded. First and foremost, we're both here to care for the patient, and this concern should be the primary driver of our collective decisions. Second, while the operating room care team is certainly more than one individual, the surgeon is ultimately the most responsible physician, what we call the MRP in Canada. They have to answer to the patient for the outcome of the surgery. When we signed up to be anesthesiologists, I think we all realized that we would be playing a supporting role. An essential one, but still a supporting role. We do not own the patient. Third, we each have our own sphere of expertise, and while we should understand in broad terms what that is for the other person, we should not presume to cross that boundary and dictate what should be done. Any conflict results from the fact that surgeons and anesthesiologists often have different perspectives and priorities for patient care, which can make for some very entertaining parodies, which you've probably all seen. Our priority is to ensure the safety and the comfort of the patient. There's no doubt that our surgical colleagues share the same priorities, certainly with regard to safety, but in the moment, many of them have operate at the top of their minds, which is understandable, if not optimal. When it comes to regional anesthesia interventions, one of the major challenges we face is that it's often viewed as an optional extra, not a necessity. There may be several reasons why your surgeon would say, don't do a block, just put them to sleep. Some of these are more valid than others. Let's look at each of them in a little more detail. It's going to take too much time is probably the commonest objection we hear from surgeons to anything we propose to do, not just in regional anesthesia. Of course, it can be irritating to hear, but I have nevertheless become increasingly aware of the pressures they are under in this respect. Each surgeon has to fight for their allocation of operating room time, and their performance is under scrutiny. If they're perceived as consistently running late, operating room management will restrict the number of cases they can put on a list or even take away time from them altogether as a penalty. And if a list overruns, they may be forced to cancel their last case, and cancellations have real detrimental effects for the patient's physical health and quality of life. Now, of course, most delays are not usually caused by us. Nevertheless, it's important that we do our best to contribute to the efficiency of the list while providing what we believe is the best anesthetic care for the patient. A couple of things can help in this respect when it comes to regional anesthesia. A dedicated block room or block area will allow parallel processing and results in time savings in multiple phases of operating room care, particularly if the regional anesthetic allows us to avoid induction and recovery from general anesthesia. We should also continually strive to optimize our technique with deliberate practice for safety, efficacy, and ultimately for efficiency. Knowing that you can rely on the success of your anesthetic block means that you can confidently tell the surgeons to go ahead with preparation and draping of the patient during the onset time for the block. This is why, for example, my go-to brachial plexus block is the infraclavicular, because in my hands at least, it's the fastest to perform, and the two-compartment spread pattern is 99.99% successful in about 15 minutes, which can be used for surgical preparation time. Similarly, I've invested in mastering pre-procedural ultrasound neuraxial imaging and the paraspinous approach to spinal anesthesia, as that, for me at least, significantly reduces any performance delays in potentially difficult patients. Many orthopedic surgeries carry a significant risk of nerve injury, usually from intraoperative traction or stretch. Many surgeons, particularly the more junior consultants, prefer to be able to perform immediate postoperative testing to reassure themselves that they did not cause any nerve injury. This is particularly true for certain shoulder and elbow surgeries where the radial, ulnar, or median nerves can be at risk. Sometimes the objection is because the surgeons believe our regional anesthesia technique is inherently risky. One example that has recently cropped up a few times in my practice is regional anesthesia for quadriceps tendon repair. Now, I believe that a femoral nerve block is the ideal technique in this situation based on the basic anatomy of the structures involved and their innervation. However, because in other settings, such as total knee replacements, ACL repair, the adductor canal block has replaced the femoral nerve block, I now have surgeons who actively push me to do an adductor canal block instead, which I think is rooted in fear that comes out of a lack of familiarity or fear of the unknown. So where appropriate, I seek to have an informed discussion with the surgeon to understand their concerns and to have a rational discussion of risks and benefits so that we come to a sensible consensus. However, I'm also prepared to be flexible and accommodating. In particular, with peripheral nerve blocks for analgesia, we always have the option of doing a postoperative block in PACU if the patient is in significant pain upon emergence, either because we didn't do a preoperative block or because the initial block choice was a suboptimal one. Now, if I anticipate possibly doing a rescue block, I have a preoperative discussion with the patient about the risks and benefits. The one major limitation to the postoperative block is that if you're in the middle of a busy list, you may not have the time to do the block yourself in the post-anesthetic care unit. And this is where having a dedicated regional anesthesia or block room team is again helpful. Compartment syndrome is an age-old controversy. Whether or not the benefit of blocks for pain control in complex orthopedic surgery outweighs the risk of masking the symptoms and delaying the diagnosis. There's much evidence to suggest that blocks can be performed safely in patients at risk, especially with appropriate vigilance and monitoring, or with specific tactics like inserting a catheter and running dilute solutions to avoid dense sensory blockade. However, this is one area where I usually accede to the preference of my surgeon, because I am not directly responsible for or in control of postoperative monitoring on the ward, or the diagnosis and subsequent management of any compartment syndrome. If the patient is in excruciating postoperative pain at emergence, we can always revisit the discussion, having a clearer idea at that point of the magnitude of possible benefit in terms of pain relief versus the risk of compartment syndrome. In my younger days, I was a bit more of a block jock, looking for every possible opportunity to do blocks and feeling a little bit disappointed and even offended if surgeons turned down my offer, say, to do a brachial plexus block for a trigger finger release or carpal tunnel release. And nowadays, with the wisdom of age, I have absolutely no problem with this. Sometimes regional anesthesia really is overkill for the procedure. And if it turns out that the patient struggles to get through it comfortably, well, we can always say, next time I could actually do a block. And similarly, post-surgical local anesthetic infiltration by surgeons is increasingly popular. This can take several different forms: simple wound infiltration of muscle layers, skin and subcutaneous tissues, intra-articular injection of local anesthetic in arthroscopic surgery, high-volume periarticular infiltration like you see here, or even targeted nerve blocks where the relevant structures are exposed. And these last two can be quite effective if they're done properly. The video that's playing demonstrates periarticular infiltration in total knee arthroplasty and is 3 minutes long, which is many times the patient's limit for most orthopedic surgeons, at least in my experience. Like most things in life and medicine, the efficacy of the intervention is very much dependent on individual performance and attention to detail. If the local anesthetic infiltration is more an afterthought, if they rush through it or leave it to an unskilled junior, then of course the results will be suboptimal. The evidence also suggests that simple wound infiltration is more short-lived compared to blocks. So I base my decision on whether to perform or advocate for nerve blocks based on the anticipated pain trajectory and my personal knowledge of the track record of that particular surgeon for the efficacy of their local anesthetic infiltration techniques. With this next one, I think you have to rely on your experience. Experience with lots of patients undergoing a similar procedure, experience with that particular surgeon, and their own awareness of just how much pain their patients go through. Despite the instinctive skepticism most of us have about surgical predictions of pain, though, I have learned that the pain response is truly variable between patients. I estimate that of all the arthroscopic shoulder surgeries I've encountered who did not get a preoperative block for some reason, roughly half of them were quite happy to continue with just systemic analgesics in the postoperative period. Surgical techniques are also evolving, and with refinement, there's often less pain. For example, we note that Most of our laparoscopic colorectal patients now do very well without any regional analgesia, and we even have one surgeon who has recently requested that we do not routinely order an IV PCA opioid. And the majority of his patients do just fine on oral opioids and the occasional intravenous doses needed. I'm a big fan of peripheral nerve block catheters for certain surgeries. They offer the most flexibility in terms of duration of analgesia, and you can also often manipulate the intensity of blockade with changes in infusion rate and local anesthetic concentration. However, sometimes our surgeons don't always appreciate our efforts to give their patients long-lasting analgesia. So once again, of course, good technique is paramount. We don't want to hinder their surgical field. And as far as possible, we want to perform the catheter as efficiently and safely as we can and build our reputation for reliability in this regard. We should educate them on the reasons for inserting catheters and the benefits this flexibility offers, especially in complex patients. It's also worth pointing out that compared to single-shot blocks, catheters are more complicated to perform and to manage afterwards. And at least in a large academic setting with learners, this means that a certain volume is required for competence and efficiency, so it can't be an occasionally done procedure. It often boils down to routine or not at all, or catheters only when Dr. X is around, which is far from ideal. At the same time, I'm prepared to once again be open-minded, and I encourage you to do so. There are many centers that have moved completely away from catheters for things like total shoulder replacements, and many patients do cope quite well with a single shot block, adjuvants, and multimodal analgesia. And arguably, a catheter that's inserted for just one night stay and removed the next morning for discharge could be viewed like flying business class. Nice to have if you can afford it, but economy class will still get the job done. Related to this, choosing the most appropriate regional anesthesia technique relies on a good understanding of the surgical procedure and the postoperative course, as well as the goals of recovery. If we know what the surgeon requires in terms of draping and positioning, where the incisions will be, the different tissues that will be traumatized, and where most of the postoperative pain will arise from, we can then choose techniques that block the specific nerves supplying the surgical territory and tissues. We can ensure that we do not interfere with the surgical field, and we can avoid causing inadvertent side effects that hinder the recovery pathway. I want to end by saying that the perioperative care of the patient is a partnership. We don't just want to ensure patient safety and optimal operating conditions. We want to ensure that the patient has the best possible recovery from the surgery and the anesthetic. Surgeons, in their pressure to operate safely and effectively, often lose sight of the patient's comfort and quality of immediate recovery. They have more pressing concerns on their minds. In addition, nurses and junior doctors in the acute pain service are the ones that handle the patient complaints related to uncontrolled pain and opioid side effects. And so your consultant surgeon may not be aware of the extent of these. We have a responsibility to advocate for our patients in these aspects, which are part of our area of expertise. So we shouldn't hesitate to provide our expert opinion to our surgical colleagues and to advocate for the right regional anesthetic in the right surgery in the right patient. At the end of the day, we're all in the same boat on a shared journey to a common destination.